Picture this. Some companies rely on multiple factories that cost $20 billion and multiple years to build, while other companies now can seemingly be built in a single weekend. So the question is, in 5 years, which one of these companies will be worth anything? I've been thinking about this a lot because my background is in consulting. I don't have a formal technical background, but I now work for a startup where I coded and built a lot of the tooling that runs our company's operations. And the tools I use to build it, they're available to everyone.
Vibe coding.
Hard code, lovely.
Gemini.
And the term of the week, I would say the term of the year has been vibe coding.
I built my latest app in less than 2 weeks, 100% with AI.
I built a photo booth app.
AI agent, the flight simulator.
Anyone can build anything now. And the question is, if anyone can just build software, software is no longer a moat for your company. It doesn't make it defensible. In fact, we're seeing this play out all the time now. So if you're thinking of joining a new startup, if you're thinking of starting a company, or you're thinking of joining an existing tech company, this video is for you. I'm going to do 3 things today. First, I'm going to walk through a framework that's going to tell you which companies are going to survive this transition of software no longer being as valuable. In a second, I'm going to tell you the specific things that are going to make a company defensible and valuable in the long term. And third, I'm going to talk through some of the specific things you can do today to either make your company valuable or things I'd look out for if I were joining a new company. Okay, let's talk about the framework. So the first dimension is how difficult is it to replicate your product? So on the left side, we have things that are really easy to replicate, and on the right side, we have things that are really hard to replicate. Basically, it's just could a dedicated team rebuild what you're trying to make? And so ways you can think about this is Facebook, for example, or Instagram. The network effects of having so many users on that platform making valuable content and consuming valuable content is really, really hard to replicate. Okay, so the second question I think is a little bit more interesting. So basically it's about, does it matter who or what produces the product or service of your business? Some things we don't care where the source came from. So for example, does the code compile? Does our package arrive on time? Our expense report get filed? Those things, we just care that gets done. We don't actually care who did it. But then for other companies, the source actually is the value of the product or service. So for example, we can think about high fashion brands like Hermes, or we can think about consulting firms like the firm I used to work for, where sure, the presentation that they give or the PowerPoint document is super valuable, but what we care actually more about, or what the customers really care about, is that it came from Bain or it came from McKinsey. This axis, essentially what it's bundling up together is taste, accountability, status, and trust. It's really a distinctively almost human element. When the source matters, even if there is some substitute that exists that can just completely create the pitch deck, can completely create the designer bag, it's not going to actually substitute the thing. You care about where the bag came from. You care about where the consulting results came from. Okay, so here's where I think things get a little bit more interesting. Let me show you how companies fall on these axes. So the bottom left is a zone that I'm going to call the danger zone. Basically, these are things that are not difficult to make and the source does not matter. These companies, unsurprisingly by the name, they are not in a good situation. The companies I think about in this category are a lot of software companies like Typeform. There's Calendly, super valuable, but you don't actually care that Calendly scheduled the thing. There's also a company called Linktree. It's in a lot of social media profiles where it just gives you links to your different stuff, basically. We're also seeing a lot of AI wrappers, general software falling into this bucket. But I think it's worth calling out that yes, a lot of general software is falling into this bucket, but there's all these conversations about software being dead or software no longer being valuable. And it's true, we're seeing, some software stocks going down, we're seeing some software hurting a little bit. But what I think is more important is just undifferentiated software. So think about software that isn't on a data set that gets more valuable with usage. If it doesn't get more valuable with usage at this point, anyone can just replicate the software. And I think this is a nice transition to the next bucket. So the next bucket, I'm going to call it the infrastructure bucket. These are products or services where they're very difficult to replicate, but no one actually cares where the source of the product or service is. Some companies that fall into this bucket are TSMC, which is a chip manufacturer. Kind of as mentioned in the beginning of the video, they rely on massive $20 billion manufacturing facilities that take years to construct, they ultimately just produce these like chips that go into our phones and like data centers and things like that. But no one really cares that they came from TSMC. We just want the chips. Other companies that kind of fall into this bucket are like Stripe, AWS, a lot of like infrastructure or utilities companies. I think like a railroad, for example. Okay, so this next bucket I want to talk about, I'm going to call them like talent bets. So these are companies where we really, really care about the source, but it is quite easy to replicate the offering. So think about almost every single influencer in the world. What you care about is the person. For example, you care about their taste. You care about Mr. Beast isn't the best example because he's got some other things that make his videos really crazy, but ultimately you care that's a Mr. Beast video. Other examples here are like design agencies. You really care about the taste and craft that's coming from this design agency and you trust the brand, but anyone can just go out and make a design agency. And this one's a little bit of a controversial take, but I feel like consulting firms fall into this as well because anyone can go out and actually create a consulting firm, but what really matters is the source of this. Like you really care that like McKinsey said this thing. Obviously there's a little bit of nuance here, like there's years of learnings, there are a lot of like talent densities at a lot of these consulting firms, but ultimately anyone can go out and do it. What matters most is like who is doing the thing. I think it's just worth noting that like companies kind of can fall in between two quadrants, but I'd put consulting firms in this bucket as well. And so the last bucket here, I'm gonna call them like fortress companies. These are basically like untouchable. So basically these are companies where we really, really care about the source. And also they are very hard to replicate. One example here is Disney. Obviously their brand is incredibly valuable. People will see that a movie was made by Disney and trust that it's good. But what I think is most interesting that happens really strongly in this fortress category is moats and things that make a company defensible kind of really compound here. And this can happen in the talent bet category and the infrastructure category, but we really see it really strongly in this fortress category. So using Disney as an example, Disney makes great content. People really trust the brand of Disney. They trust the source of Disney. This great brand has attracted talent pools that are really hard to replicate. And then also, because they're making such great content, they're able to bring this content to life through their theme parks. And then also, they own infrastructure and have Disney Plus. I think it's Disney Plus. Let me look it up. I actually don't have it. Okay, yeah, it's Disney Plus, confirmed Disney Plus. They have Disney Plus, which distributes all their content. It is really hard for someone to come in, make great content, own distribution for the content, and then bring that content to life through like $1 billion spent in theme parks. Okay, so let's talk about what are the things that are actually going to move a company to make it either harder to replicate or make the source of the product or offering more valuable. I think about these across like 3 different buckets. So the ones that are making your offering harder to replicate, the ones that make the source matter more, or the ones that might benefit both. And so I'm not going to talk through all these because this would be incredibly boring, but I'll talk through a few highlights. Let's talk about the first bucket of moats that make a company harder to copy. So one example that we've already talked about is data. If you have a software solution that is built on data that gets smarter the more a company or more a user uses the product, that's harder to copy. Additionally, I like physical infrastructure a lot. I'm very biased to this because I work for a company that operates this way, but if you can have some sort of physical infrastructure, so it could be, giant manufacturing facilities, or it can be just an army of employees, like a large army of employees that are distributing your product. Think about like Uber, they have a ton of drivers. That's much harder to replicate, even if the software itself is not too difficult. This next category is things that make the source matter more. The one I want to talk through here is trust and accountability. If you're the entity that gets blamed when something goes wrong, that's a great position to be in. So for example, if a consulting firm says the wrong thing, it gets pushed back on the consulting firm. If I'm an executive at a company and I'm like, I have this idea and McKinsey said it's good, that's going to hold a lot of weight. However, if it was actually a bad idea, McKinsey's brand is going down. So really being the person or being the entity that's behind the outcome of a service or offering is incredibly valuable. Okay, the third category pushes things in both directions. So long-term relationships, having an ecosystem surrounding your products, things like that. The thing I want to call out here is almost none of these are that technical. Main things here are like trust and accountability and having infrastructure behind your offering. Nothing to do with code. That's what's going to persist value in the future. Okay, so let's talk about what you can actually do. The first thing for going into like some specific examples is if I were an existing software company today, I was just launching one today, I would move as fast as I can. Software still is a moat today. Like you can vibe code whatever you want, but to make something with like good security, things like that is actually still pretty hard. And so while you have this brief window, I would be really thinking strategically about what, if any of these moats, I can gather up. But to talk through some specific moats and specific things I do, this is what I do. So the first one is I would think about if there's, we kind of talked about this a little bit, I think about if there's any proprietary data that I can build my tool off of. So a very tactical example of this is if you want to make a staffing software. Don't just make a staffing software where people can staff their employees, make a software that learns. If every single time I staff, it gets smarter and can proactively staff for you, that's more valuable. Or even better, what if it's learning across how everyone staffs and it can actively predict, what holes and what gaps you need to fill? That's a company that's more defensible, even if it is just software. Now, another example that I've kind of talked about a little bit is I would think about how I could position my company to be accountable. So if I were making a law software, for example, I would almost think it'd be more valuable to make a law firm that's enabled by the software than just making a pure software that I sell. That's a lot more defensible, it's a lot harder, and if it's tech enabled, maybe you can like lower your operating costs and there's some wins there. Okay, so another one I talk through is I would move towards the physical. So what that means, if I were designing software is going to be very easy to replicate. It already is very easy to replicate, but things immediately adjacent to it are a lot harder. So for example, marketplaces are classically very defensible, incredibly hard to start, but there's a lot of defense there. Angie is a software company, but they're valuable because there are tons of contractors out on the platform. So I look for opportunities where I could have my software offering be adjacent to something physical or something real as well. The last example I'll talk through is very hard to do in practice, but I think it's incredibly important to call out. It's really valuable to try and be incredibly embedded in how people operate or how your customers do their day-to-day. Even if your company can be really easily copied, as long as you are a habit for the customer or you're super embedded into their workflow, it's gonna be really, really hard for them to change to something else. That is incredibly hard to do, but if you can do it, your company's gonna last. So here's the irony. As software gets easier and easier to copy, the things that are valuable are the things like brand, trust, infrastructure, relationships, things that are not technical but almost feel distinctively human. And I think that's really cool. If you found this video useful or interesting, please drop a comment. I'd love to hear where you think your company kind of falls on this 2x2. And if you want more videos like this, please subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.